everybody, my name is Divya Ramesh and today I'll be giving a talk on the use of body lifting by elongate amphibious fishes to move on mud. Many extant amphibious fishes regularly move across the water-to-land interface using three distinct strategies that are characterized based on the use of lateral body bending and fin use. Of these, the first type is the axial-based locomotion, where the animal uses its elongated body to laterally bend to progress forward. This is analogous to snakes using lateral undulation when moving on solid ground. Here is an example of the roefish using this particular strategy. The second type is the axial appendicular-based locomotion, where the animal uses a combination of fin lifting and body bending. This is analogous to a person crawling on the ground. Here is an example of the bashir using this particular strategy. The third type is the appendicular-based locomotion, where the animal uses its pectoral fins to lift its body upwards and propel it forward. This is analogous to a person using crutches when walking. Here is an example of the mudskipper using this particular type of strategy. In this talk, we'll be focusing on the axial-based locomotion used by elongate fishes, and here we will use roefish as our model organism. The water-to-land interface often consists of wet flowable substrates such as mud and wet sand. Moving on such substrates can be a challenge because it can behave like a solid or a fluid depending on the forces applied relative to that of the yield strength. The yield strength at which the solid to fluid transition occurs also varies a lot depending on the substrate getting wetter or drier. And substrates such as mud can also have a strong cohesion, which causes it to stick to the animal's body and appendages. And in order for us to understand how the elongate fishes cope with mud strength variation in the natural environment, we need to systematically vary the mud strength. Many previous studies have found the use of fins and lateral body bending by elongate fishes when moving on land and in water. But we have very little understanding of how elongate fishes cope with mud strength variation. And in this particular study, we will show our discovery of significant use of vertical bending by elongate fishes when coping with challenging mud. And we will show what we are doing to understand this particular function. So as a first step, we developed an automated mud preparation system that allows us to mix mud more evenly. We then developed a sealing method that allows us to control the water evaporation when the testbed is not used for experiments. So the way it works is that we used a container with airtight lids. We added rubber sealing strips along the inner edge of the lids to make it more airtight. We then added a plastic sheet on top of the mud to prevent the water from evaporating onto the top of the lid. We then added straps to reduce the gaps to prevent the water from escaping through the gaps. Now during the experiments, we need to keep track of the water evaporation. So we built a portable penetrometer that allows us to characterize the mud between on multiple locations on the mud testbed during the experiments. As part of the experimental setup, we placed the testbed in the middle, surrounded it with high-speed cameras, and which allows us to track the animals during the experiments. We then developed an experimental protocol that allows us to first stir, flatten to reset the mud, test the fish, use the penetrometer to characterize the mud strength, and then repeat the process. In this study, we used a total of 5 animals and collected a total of 62 trials. We then varied the mud strength between weak and strong mud across 3 different mud strengths. Here, cracked dry mud essentially means that we first flattened the wet mud, let it dry out for several days, which created the dry mud. Now, because the dry mud has minimal water content, when we let it out to dry for more days, cracks started to form on the mud. Now, just to get an idea or give you an idea of how different the mud strengths are in terms of the strength, here is the figure of the strength varying with phi in terms of the force at 1 centimeter penetration depth from our mud characterization experiments using the portable penetrometer. So at the 39% mud is around 7 times stronger compared to the 27% mud at 1 centimeter depth, and the dry mud is around 60 times stronger than the 39% mud at 0.03 centimeter depth. Now, to understand how the animal's performance varies with the mud strength variation, we measured the forward distance per cycle. In these figures, the color corresponds to the force from the mud characterization at 1 centimeter penetration depth. The lines correspond to the average distance per cycle, and each curve corresponds to a single trial. Here, we found that as the animal progressed forward over each cycle, the distance reduced. We then plotted the histogram of the occurrence of the cycles, and we found that the animal moved more often and more cycles on stronger mud. We then, when we plotted the average distance per cycle as the function of the mud strength, we found that there was no change in the performance with the mud strength variation. We then measured the sinkage of the animal, which is denoted by delta H, at minimal body lifting. And here, the sinkage is defined as the difference between between the height of the animal when off of the mud, denoted by W, and the height of the animal when on the mud, denoted by W dash. And this difference between the two gives you the sinkage, delta H. So here we found that as the mud strength got weaker, then the sinkage got increased, which suggests that it is more challenging for the animal to move on weaker mud. We then measured the contact length of the animal, which is denoted by the red curve, which is defined as the length of the animal in contact with the mud with respect to the body length of the animal. Here, from this figure, you can see that as the mud got weaker, the animal had increased contact length, which means that the animal started to make more adjustments on weaker mud. So, on stronger mud, the contact length is reduced, which means that the animal has more lifting. So the ropefish lifts more parts of the body on stronger mud, likely to reduce drag. Here, red arrows indicate where the lifting occurs on the animal, and from the videos you can see, the bottom two videos, you can see that the animal starts to lift parts of its body on multiple parts, on multiple locations on the body over one cycle. Many terrestrial animals use vertical bending to enhance locomotion. Elongate terrestrial animals such as snakes also use vertical lifting in gaits such as side winding, where they use a superposition of the horizontal and the vertical waves at a phase difference of plus or minus 90 degrees. And they also use lifting in combination with lateral undulation to enhance locomotion. So we speculate that elongate fishes also can use vertical bending. It is plausible that these elongate fishes use these gaits using vertical bending, because there has been observations of American eels and snowflake moray using vertical bending when moving on flowable substrates. A previous study mentioned the use of vertical bending by mud skippers when moving on an inclined sand, but how the elongate fishes use vertical bending to cope with the challenges with the substrate variation is still not well understood. So, previous study in snakes found that snakes lift parts of their body during lateral undulation to modulate ground friction. Fishes likely lift parts of their body for a similar function when moving on harder ground, but with a poorer control due to the difficulty in pushing against the substrate to progress forward. In order to understand the lifting in these fishes, we have started looking into the kinematic measurements, the robophysical modeling, and the resistive force modeling. So as part of the kinematic measurements, we are to gain more insights in the lifting and the lateral bending coordination. We tracked multiple points on the animal's body, and we created these 3D curves from these tracked points. Here's an example of the 3D curves looking from a top view and a side view across different time, which is denoted by the different colors. Now, this coordination between the lifting and the lateral bending is quite complex, and so we need a robophysical model to help perform a systematic sweep of parameters that affect both lifting and lateral bending. So we have developed a robophysical model that is capable of lifting. We plan on combining the lifting and lateral undulation and perform more systematic experiments by sweeping across the parameters that affect both the lifting and the lateral undulation on different mud strengths. Now, because the animal starts using lifting on higher mud strengths, we need to estimate the lift and drag forces on the animal's body and also on the robot's body to understand the need for lifting on higher mud strengths. So, resistive force theory can be used to calculate the ground reaction forces for flowable substrates given the kinematics and the substrate characterization. So previous studies have used resistive force theory in estimating these forces on the locomotor's body for sand, but we still do not have anything established for mud yet. So as a first step, we have developed a horizontal drag force measurement device that allows us to measure the forces in the lateral and the fore-aft direction. So what we did was we varied the probe angle between 0 and 90 degrees and then varied the sinkage depth between 0.2, 0.5, and 1 centimeter. We then collected a total of 3 trials per parameter combination. We then varied the mud strength between weak and strong mud across 3 different mud strengths. And here's an example video for 27 mud strength where the probe is moving at a 0 degrees and at 0.2 centimeter sinkage depth. And here are sample figures of the forward and the lateral force that were measured for 27% mud at different probe angles at 1 centimeter sinkage depth. We plan on using these force measurements in developing resistive force theory that will allow us to estimate the forces on the animals and the robot's body for mud similar to that of sand to help understand the need for lifting on higher mud strengths. With this, I would like to conclude that roe fish had no change in the performance with the mud strength variation despite the mud becoming challenging to move on. The sinkage and the contact length measurement showed that they adjust the contact length and lift less on weak mud and lift more on stronger mud. To help understand how the forces affect the body lifting, we have started quantifying the 3D kinematics and resistive force theory, and we have also developed a robophysical model to systematically study lifting in the fishes. With this, I would like to thank everyone who have been involved in the discussions. I would like to thank my lab members who have been involved in various aspects of the project, and I would also like to thank the funding sources. Thank you.